to this event tonight. I am really looking forward to this myself. I'm going to be taking notes because tonight we're talking about the future of where all of us are going. I've been in the business years, decades, and you know, when I started we were on typewriters before computers, and people still smoked in the newsrooms back then. Yep, it was a long time ago, and no one probably could dream that we would be where we are today. But where we are today isn't relevant, because tomorrow is right around the corner, and that's what we're going to learn about tonight, is tomorrow. Before I introduce our speaker and expert tonight, I do want to tell you there is a sheet going around. If you would all please sign it and put your email. We would love to inform you of other programs that we have that might be of interest to you. And also there is plenty of food and drink in the back. Please help yourselves. I know it's the dinner hour. Probably some of you did not get to eat, so we have sandwiches and wraps and chips back there. Please enjoy. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce Brad King. He is the Director of Media Informatics here at NKU, a fairly new program, and a lot of people have no idea what media informatics is. So I think that's probably one of the first things that Brad will address. And then he's going to take us into the future. Without any further ado, Brad.
Thank you. So quickly, we have somebody recording this tonight, so you'll see me kind of staying in this area so that we can keep it all together. This is going to be a Google document, both the presentation and the notes, so if you're interested in this, hopefully you will be afterwards. We have the email address, just let me know. We'll take a look at that list and I'll make sure you get added to this. This is also the beginning of a 4-part series that I'll be doing around the country at different both SBJ events and interactive festivals and conferences about this. So you're getting the second version of this. So hopefully it will be focused on what it is that you want. I also want this to be a conversation. Some of you have had me in class before, and I get bored of listening to myself talk. So if you have a question as we're going through things or a comment, I'm happy to take those as we go along. We have about an hour. Hopefully we will be able to get through it. We may run a couple minutes long, but I'll try not to get too far past that. If I see you all getting up to leave, if the food's gone, we'll stop. First of all, my name is Brad King. I am the coordinator for the Media Informatics program. Media Informatics is essentially storytelling in the digital age. We do HTML, 2D, 3D. We do audio, video for the web. We do storytelling. We do linear and non-linear storytelling. It's sort of taking all the components that you see on a screen and teaching you the basic skill base to learn how to do those things. It isn't journalism. It's not radio, film, television. It's not advertising. It's not any of that. We work with the different groups to do that, but that's not what we do. So we exist sort of outside of those. But in a modern world, there aren't many journalism sites or radio, film, television sites or movie sites or game sites or any kind of, that doesn't have some kind of web component to it. So that's what we do. My background is that I've been a journalist since 1984. I started at City Beat way back when it first started, and my sneakers were on the first cover. That's my local claim to fame. I was the homeless guy. Those were my sneakers during the Buddy Gray, Jim Tarbell affair. And then I left and I sort of lived around the country, and I got my master's degree from Berkeley, and then I worked out at MIT in technology review. In the last 6 or 7 years, what I've done is work with digital technology and building online newsrooms within the confines of either a television station or a magazine or a newspaper. So I have sort of been in the trenches in terms of what we call, in my field, the cultural gutter. It's the place that nobody else wanted to work, because 10 years ago, nobody wanted to work on the web. So it was a great place to advance through your career, and then you sort of reach a certain point where you realize that you're working on the web and most people don't really pay that much attention to it. And then the last few years happen, and suddenly all the little nerds become very important. And so now we're trying to figure out a common language that we can all talk together. Because there are traditional journalists, there are programmers, there are designers, and we all speak a different language. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that language is today. We're going to talk about the technologies that are out there that you need to be aware of and familiar with. And they're going to look a little different than what journalists traditionally think they look like. We're going to talk about business models, and we're going to talk about structures of newsrooms. Now, it's not going to apply to everybody, and there's going to be people that disagree with me, and everywhere I've gone, there's been people that disagree with me. So if there was one way to do this, we wouldn't be having this conversation. These are the things that I've both learned from other people before me, and things that I found to be successful in the worlds that I've lived in. And I think there are always ways to sort of figure out what it is that templates best onto what you're doing. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. When I talk about language, this is the story that I always tell. I've been programming and on computers since 1984 when I was 12. So I know a little bit about how to talk to programmers, and most of my friends are little nerdy programmers and the smelly trolls, like I call them, and we all hang out, and it's great. My first day of technology review, I get into an argument with my programmer about what the head should look like. We're programming templates for our content management system. So the head needs to look like this. Heads don't look like anything. So heads look like they need to be. So after about 15 minutes, I realized he was talking about the head of his program, which describes what the program does, which you never see, and it has no, and I was talking about the headline. So I immediately realized we had a glossary problem, and that we needed to take a step back and really figure out what it was we were trying to accomplish. So we're going to start tonight by looking at some of the things where the language of new media, and that's the last time we'll call it new media, because I call it modern media. The language of modern media. And you can trace it back all the way back to the 50s, and we'll touch on that a little bit. But really, when we began to look at what interactivity was, and what the web was, and how the web was different, started with a thing called the Clue Train Manifesto. And the Clue Train Manifesto was 95 rules. And they were rules that defined the ways in which interactivity was changing the way you do business. The essence of it is, all business is a conversation. Everything you do is a conversation. Now, businesses traditionally have not liked that conversation. They liked it to be a one-to-many. We're going to tell you. And the Clue Train Manifesto says, and I'm about to show you some charts that will illustrate this, that you can choose not to participate in it. If you're a business, you can say, we're going to tell you what's important. And you'll immediately find yourself out on an island, out of the conversation completely. Because what's happening is you have networks of networks where everybody can talk, and it's a read-write web, which means you can both say something and somebody can say something back to you, and if you choose not to participate in that, you're going to be left behind. And I'm going to show you a map of the most influential blog, and it's going to be a sphere of blogs that's going to illustrate sort of where we are with that. So this is a map of the blogosphere, and what they do is, Doug's going to like the next 4 of these because it's visualizing these things. What they measured your influence in 3 ways. The people who link to you, the people who you link to, and then the most important factor is the people that link back and forth, meaning the people that are engaged in the conversation the most. The big yellow sun is a site called Boing Boing. How many people have heard of Boing Boing? So Boing Boing is actually run, David Peskovitz is one of the members who started here at CityBeat. I actually followed him out to Berkeley. Mark Frauenfelder, Cory Doctorow, and Shenny Jardin. It's 4 people. And they have, the last I checked, they were around 6 or 7 million. I wouldn't be shocked if they were around 10 million users a month. 10 million people that come to them. The size of that link compared to the size of all the other links means the amount of people that are linking to them are almost equal to the people that they link to. Now, how that happens is this. They do their news by having users submit interesting things that they see, and then they'll comment on it and say, here, they'll give some context to what that means. It's called a directory of wonderful things. So it really is just things that they think are neat. And there just happen to be 10 million other people out there that find what they find interesting to be very interesting. Now, from Boing Boing, because Boing Boing used to be a magazine way back in the way back, went out of business. I grew up reading Boing Boing, became a website. Cory Doctorow became a fellow with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which you should look up if you don't know what that is. Mark Frauenfelder was one of the original editors at Wired magazine. Shani Jardin now does she does a whole technology on an NPR, and David Peskovitz works in the Science and Robotics Lab at Berkeley. They got most of their jobs post what they did before. Many of them worked at Wired because of this. Because when you have 10 million people that are listening to what you say, it's pretty easy to get somebody to hire you. And anybody that works on the web knows traffic is king. So we look at this and say, well, okay, this is very important. It's not enough that people link to you. You have to be involved in the conversation back with them. So then we begin to visualize this on a grander scale. So this is the entire blogosphere. So this is everything that's interesting, and like mine is here. But you begin to see the enormity of what you're competing with. You're not just competing with other news organizations. You're not competing with local this or national this or international this. You're competing, and I'm about to show you something that's going to make this even worse, everybody. And these nodes, and these supernodes being like the big sun, that is Boing Boing, become just as powerful as what most of us do, only they're read-write. They don't have the conversations that go on in newsrooms about, should we put this up? Should we have this? We need to take this down. That's not a discussion with them, because it's a self-moderating community, and we're going to talk about what that means. Because there are 11 things we know about how you build a community. We know them. We've known them for years. And we're going to explain to you how we know them, because you all go shop at the places that do that, and you read the sites that have them. So beginning to understand that the read-write has a profound impact on what we're doing.
I'm fascinated by your word compete. Because I know people, myself included, who blog and they don't care if anybody reads it.
Mm-hmm.
It's purely a...
Mm-hmm. Boing Boing is a business.
Right. You know, I'm not going to try to compete with Boing. I'm just...
Where do you work?
I'm unemployed right now.
Okay. People that work at newspapers and media organizations are competing with them for knowledge.
I agree, but most of those blue dots are just somebody writing about their passion.
Sure. And then there are all these others. I'm not saying that everybody that blogs does this. What I'm saying is the sphere that you're competing in, if you're in the media, is different than the International Herald Tribune, the Asian Times, the Washington Post. Because there are 10 million people that go to Boing Boing, and there are 4 people that make their livelihoods and make a very good one, and then are hired by traditional media outlets because they come with 10 million people that when they post a link on their site, will follow them there. And so what we're going to see in one of the future slides, I think, is the breakdown. This is my favorite one. Actually, I don't know if I have this one, and I'll make sure that I put it up. There is a breakdown of the different kinds of blogs that are out there, because the conversation that I'll have with the journalism department sometimes, and actually all over the place as well, blogs just, as my old boss used to call them, shut-ins in their mom's basement. Right? Like, my dog is attacking me. And what you find is what becomes these supernodes, and that exterior part, the multicolored part, are socio-political blogs. They are generally people talking about politics, things in society, legal. Cars is a big one for whatever reason. Cars is a huge blogosphere. So you can actually begin to trace those and say, yeah, here are the nutters. Here's the people like with their cat blog. And then there's this gigantic group of people who are writing and talking about the things that we in the media talk about. And we have to acknowledge that they exist, and they are, in terms of our business, competitors. And they have an advantage because the traditional rules that we believe apply, which is that we know best, don't apply necessarily in the read-write world. It's a we know pretty good, but you might know a little too. And sometimes we're wrong. And if you go to Boing Boing, they don't have an erase or takedown policy. They have a strike-through policy. So when they're wrong, they strike it through and correct it right there on the page. It never goes away. It's not 1984. It's not we were always at war with Oceania. It's, well, we messed this up today because we're mostly right. So this, then, if we move outside of the blogosphere, this is actually a map of a network of all the cities that are connected around the globe. Looks like a spider web on a, which is nice since it's the web, right? This is what you're ultimately competing with. If you make a mistake, and we've all read about it, we've all done it. I write every day for a news organization, and as soon as something gets published and it's wrong, and I don't know what it is on your beats, but you do it on the tech beat, and you got like 4,000 Slashdoters or Apple freaks telling you what's wrong with your mother. Like, you have the world connected together, immediately connected together. So to imagine that somehow you get to dictate or control how this works is a misnomer. You may want to, but and we're going to talk about how opening up to read-write doesn't mean there aren't rules. There are absolutely rules, and there are ways that you continue to do journalism that are exactly the same way that we are today, or even 10 years ago. And I would argue that are more journalistic than what we do today. But if you understand that the landscape is this, then we've made at least a little initial progress. And then this is the network of networks. That's the world. Now, I want to just real quickly before I get to the actual presentation, one of the things that we're going to talk about, when I talk about modern media, you see lots of things like this happen. We're going to take Google Maps and we're going to put our story on it. And that's great, but that's not modern media. Modern media is using your users and mapping them in real time, getting responses to the things that you do. Does anybody know what Twitter is? I know there's some of you. So Twitter is a service that you use with your instant messenger program. You have buddies, and you can update everybody like where you're at. So I talked to Howard Reingold today about this just to make sure that I wasn't being crazy. So whatever's crazy is Howard Reingold. And what you can do is actually map in real time what people are saying. Now this in and of itself is kind of stupid. Right? Like, who cares? Like, I don't care. I barely care about the people next to me, let alone strangers on the other side of the room. But what becomes very interesting is on election night. On election night, Google Maps teamed up with Twitter, and you could literally watch what was going on around the country on Super Tuesday as people were coming out of their polls and saying, hey, you know what, I had a problem here, this was going on, and you can immediately click on their name and get in touch with them. Is that the greatest journalism tool in the whole world? I don't know, it's only been around for about a year. But you can see a possibility for beginning to track that. You can throw together a database where you say, well, wow, we not only have people, we have people who were there and people who willingly said, here's what I saw. Now, Twitter's about ready to introduce, and there is services that do this, camera phone stuff as well. So how amazing would it be to turn people loose with their cell phones and say, because we all hear about voter fraud, I don't think there's probably anybody in this room that doesn't think there are some votes that don't get counted. Well, you got a cell phone and a map. You can send people out and you can get your folks and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a database in real time that we can watch that then stores that. And then at the end of the night, we can go in and say, okay, well, here were the instances where people were posting images of things that seemed fraudulent. So now we got some stuff as opposed to, well, Diebold, it's the paperclip. They put Larry Lessig took the paperclip, or Ed Felton took the paperclip and he erased everything. So there are tools that you can begin to use, and this looks radically different. Oops, I don't know where to go. Did I delete it? There. Than that. So in my world, we've sort of moved past what this is. This is neat. But as Mark Cuban has told me, this doesn't do anything for me that I couldn't do before. I could make a map. What does this allow you to do for me? I've just taken my same information and thrown some neat technology on it. So what we need to look at is how can we engage in a read-write world? All right. So hopefully you're all not completely ready to walk out, although it wouldn't be the first time. Ignore the technology here as an example of what we should have. All right. So now we're going to go through Journalism 2010. All right, there's 3 ideas that we're going to discuss tonight. The first is that the banner business model is over. And the banner business model has been over for a couple years. Just take a minute and think about that, particularly if you're in a page view kind of world. And I'll show you why that is. The second is that actual technologists need to have a seat at the table. You can't cross-train people to learn things in a way that's going to allow you to operate in a modern world. If you could, you wouldn't have people that ran soundboards and cameras, and you wouldn't have people that did anchors, and you wouldn't have people that did stand-ups, and you wouldn't have producers, and you wouldn't have editors and designers and reporters. You'd have one person that did everything.
That's what they're trying to do right now.
I know what they're trying to do, but they're only trying to do it on the web. As if somehow you can, and we're going to go through the skills that you need, you can learn .NET, Visual Basic, Flash, what else? Linux, Maya, understand how databases work, go out and report a story, get it, come back, put a story together, create it, and that's going to work. If that's the case, we should just have no photographers or no reporters, no editors, no copy editors, certainly, because you should absolutely, right? You should, if you're a writer, you should know how to copy edit, because copy editing is not a skill, right? But no, we look at those and recognize that those are skills that take a long time to get. And I don't care how long you've done Flash, unless you're like under 30. And maybe I'll miss a few people here. But I can take one of my kids who are designers that have been doing it, and they're going to know how to do it better than you. And the difference will be Twitter television versus Forbes putting the top 10 stories on a Google map. The difference is read versus read-write. And the third thing is that newsrooms need to begin to resemble technology companies in the ways in which they structure their teams. And that you don't say you need to know everything. At a technology company, you have a project manager, and then you find people with skill sets, and you work together on projects. Now, you can go the Apple route in the early 80s where Steve Jobs pitted everybody against each other and the company fell apart. That'd be the bad one. But the good way is to say, let's take the skill set. Let's do Google. Right? I mean, Google's not a bad place to look. Google has teams. And they then turn those teams loose and say, okay, what is it that as a group your skill set can do? As opposed to saying you as one person need to do everything. All right, so I sort of struggled with which way to, this thing could be a 10-hour lecture and we're not going to do that, so I've just sort of arbitrarily decided to do in the middle. The first thing we need to recognize is that old content models don't work. Second thing is that banner ads are dead and keywords are silly. We need to repurpose across all mediums, and you need to invest in your users. They seem like very simple concepts, but they're surprisingly not when you begin to get into the details. So the first thing that we know is that, I'm not going to look at the entire content model of newspapers or magazines, or this is just an example of why content models don't work. So the Associated Press, about 40% of most major daily newspapers is Associated Press. It's anywhere between 25 and 40% according to AP's stats. AP revenues, and we're going to look at how this has changed, only 30% of their revenues come from newspapers these days. 37 from broadcast, 18 from international, and 15 from online. That's changed in the last 18 years. In 1990, $311 million, or 100% of their revenues, came from newspapers.
I happen to know a bunch of people work at AP, and they told me that their #1 biggest customer now.
Yeah, we were just about to get to that. Yahoo Finance. That was actually what changed the model when Yahoo Finance launched. So then we look at 2006 when they do have broadcast and internet. We know that they've only spent newspapers were $211 million. So that means $468 million came from somewhere else. And they're doing that because we know the newspaper business is an awful business to try to make money. It's awful. Media is awful. So they're beginning to branch out. This has, of course, upset newspapers and anybody who's in the traditional media because they're now getting pushed out and they funded AP forever, right? So this is bad for them. And what we find interesting is that their major investments are internet and broadcast. And what's your name? James. Like James said, Yahoo Finance was really one of the first things that turned the AP model. Yahoo Finance is all AP. I think it used to be all AP. They may have some, I'm sure they have Forbes and other stuff now. AP has also cut the routine state and local reporting, which is primarily what you would use them for so that your reporters could go out and focus on enterprise stories and things that were of a larger nature. So why would AP do that? Well, because AP ain't telling what's going on at the city council to Yahoo. People want enterprise stories. That's where the money is. There's only more and more of these things coming on, and we're going to get into it. You know, AOL, Microsoft, Yahoo, Google. There's a reason AOL's ditching their ISP model. They all own ad networks. They're all creating portals of content. They're all using this, and they do search and keyword. Get to that in a second. This part, doom and gloom. It gets better. We know the banner is dead because the people that click on most banners are called heavy clickers, and they provide little return of investment, and they're the people that you don't want clicking. Now this is a generality. Don't raise your hand and say, well, we know what ours is, because I know like at Technology Review, we had like a 7% click-through rate, but we had a very specific niche nerdy audience that wanted blade surfers, right? So they're going to click. New browsers block ads. And if you're under, I'm going to say 35 since I'm 35. If you're under 35, you haven't seen an ad on a news site, on any site, in 5 or 6 years. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. And keyword search dominates revenues, and local advertising is primarily tied up with national companies, which those of you who work at Gannett and big companies know that. All right, so the heavy clicker. 6% of the online population accounts for 50% of the click-throughs. This is from ComScore and eMarketer, companies that track these kinds of things. We know they're between the ages of 25 and 44. These would be the shut-ins, right? These are the people that your mom warned you about. Their income is under $40,000. They don't spend any money. They just click through to see what's going on because they're bored. And if you've ever been up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you've all back there just clicked through and seen what the hell, what's that? And they primarily visit auction, gambling, and career services sites. Right, so, you know, we don't want to generalize, but these are the heavy clickers. The users that you do want are the people that are using Firefox, and I'm going to tell you why that's really bad if you're in the banner business. 25% of IE's user base in the last 2 years has been taken by internet or by Firefox. Who uses Firefox in the room? So maybe more than that. Firefox users are, by and large, they have more education, they make more money, 51% make over $75,000, they're younger, and they visit bookstores, resources, and directories. Resources and directories are the most important thing in keyword world. Databases that give you information that you want. And that's where these people are going. And that's who you want. The problem is that Firefox comes with this wonderful thing called AdBlock and AdBlock Plus. It's a plugin, blocks HTML advertising, allows you to block Flash, comes with automatic blacklists of advertisers depending on the country that you're in. It's not built in now, but it will be built in the next iteration in all likelihood. So what does that mean? And apologies to the end wire. So what we're going to see, this is a before AdBlock. And right now we're just going to look at the logos, because we know Greg does our PR stuff here. Logos and marketing, this is important stuff, right? It's your brand. Here's what my page looks like. There's no logo. There's also no logos over here. All I want is text. It gets worse. We're going to look on the right side because where do we put ads? Right? They run across the right side. And all this great stuff. What we're going to see with AdBlocker, I didn't have to do anything other than install this. Right. That's what my page looks like. So to imagine that we exist in a world where 37% of the people use Firefox, and when you look at the incremental growth, it's about 12 to 15% every year for Firefox. This is what my pages look like for the last several years. Does anybody else use AdBlock in this room? A couple of you. Come to media informatics or computer science or CIT, and there isn't anybody that sees an ad. So we begin to get concerned about that of our model. And you can tell this, we have models, and I'm not going to put them up because it's proprietary information from when I ran technologyreview.com. We had the spreadsheets, and you could see when it was happening because there would be a certain percentage of ads that you expected to get hit, and then you would see actual ad impressions. And we could never quite work out why it was about 30% less than what it should be. And then one of my little programmers came in and said, dummy, because nobody looks at ads anymore. Which was frightening since I had come in and said, here's our model. Then I had to go back about a month later and go, here's our new model. So what that means is that we need to begin to look at keywords. We're not going to touch a great deal upon interface. But what you're going to see, I'm going to tell you this right now. What you're going to see in 5 years is a three-dimensional web. Because people who have been doing this don't think of the web as a page. I don't think of it as something I roll down. I think of it as something that I pull back. And I can put, and I showed this to the Enquirer, I can put every Enquirer story on one page above the fold every day where you never get another page and you can read every story. Now, if I'm a user, I don't care what your business model is. Because there's going to be someone like, say, Google, who will make their news like that, and you're about to see the end of the mouse, because the mouse has long been the worst interface. When you go back to Xerox PARC, it was what was rated as the least effective, right? What's the most effective interface that we have? Right there. And the next one is a trackball. And if you work in 3D and if you've ever played a video game or a computer game, you know, here's how you do everything. That's what we're about. You don't believe me? How many people have a Wii? Right. So we're beginning to see that interface change. So the fact that that's your business model doesn't mean it is the business model. So we see these keywords becoming important. And in a 3D world, and even in a bannerless world, keywords become very important. And we know they're important because these guys wouldn't be getting rid of all, like Yahoo and Microsoft are trying to merge, not because of Google, but because they'll have better search and they'll have better directories and they'll be able to deliver more keyword advertising. That's essentially they're trying to fight with Google. Now right now, in 2003 they had 40%. I couldn't find the most recent, but I'm going to bet that in the last 5 years it's probably more than that. We know that 10% of the major advertisers control the bulk of local advertising. We know right now print still dominates local advertising. We know that. Newspapers still do the bulk of local advertising. TV folks still do the bulk of local advertising, right? It's not Google coming in here and taking it from them. But the problem is, according to the Internet Ad Bureau, who handles Internet ads, in 2004 and 2005, it was local markets are going to take off. They are the future. We can all be safe, rest assured, and then 6 and 7 happened, and they were like, so the other thing happened, is that the market flattened out. And so this growth that we expected didn't happen. What we do know is AOL, Microsoft, and Yahoo reach 1 billion people. They're optimized for search. We live in a search world, right? You either, it ain't like it was when I grew up, like where you literally went to Justin Hall's links.com or links.net, and it was like, hey, here's the new stuff online today. Or I'm on CompuServe in 1986, and I'm, telling it now like I'm in Japan. This is great.
Do you remember your username?
I was, no, but you know what's funny? Is that I had a girl who I chatted with out in California when I was 15 found me on MySpace and sent me a note like last month, and I totally blocked her. I'm like, that's too creepy. And I'm a shut-in nerd, and I was like, I don't need my childhood past coming back on MySpace. So, but we don't stumble upon things unless you use stumbled upon. And then you only use it for fun. Sometimes you feel lucky, right? But for the most part, you don't. That's only funny to people that like feel lucky on Google, right? For the most part, we bookmark and we search. That's what we do. We have the sites that we go to. So we have these people like Google who have opened up their entire architecture and say, hey, develop whatever you want on this, right? They're data companies. They collect data. They allow you to search it. They put it in databases. They don't say, here's the way you're going to eat it. They say, we don't care how you eat it, as long as you're eating it. And we can go back to that network picture. And you can try to be read, but they're read right. And I would take Google stock over anybody's stock in this room. I would take crappy Microsoft stock or crappy Yahoo stock. So what are the models then? We're now going to move out of Chicken Little. A little bit. I never totally get out of there. The first thing that you have to do is understand that the technology that you have that runs your sites, that run your media, you need to open up to people. It's okay for you to define, here's how we do this, but it's not okay for you to say this is the only way that you can. Google ain't Google because they did everything. Google's Google because they got like 8 gazillion servers, and they go out and make some neat stuff, and then they put it up in Google Labs and say, have a good time. Everybody seen the child molester map? So if you ever move into, if you got kids or you're thinking about buying a house, you can go to the child molester map and you can say, here's my address. And then it's a database of everybody who's been convicted of a sex crime. And it's broken up around the whole country. Broken up by the kind that it is, and you can, I'll post it in the Google Doc for those of you who sign up, and do a search. And I lived in Villa Hills, and I thought, no problem. And then I moved out of Villa Hills because everywhere around there, I was like, what the hell? Like, I can't go anywhere. But it wasn't any company that did that. Google just opened it up. And then a company that, you like that? You like that? A company, a nonprofit that dealt with sex offenders took their data and mapped it onto Google Maps. And I don't care what news organization you are, you're not going to do a better job than the people that do this nationally. So you say, okay, we're going to take what we have and we're going to open it up. You're going to open up your publishing. And what that means, and 2 and 3 are kind of the same. And I'm always fearful of giving away my idea because I was raising money before I got a job at MIT and I had a bunch of money to start a company. But now I'm making so much here, I think I can get this one. Is that if you're in the news business, and this, Chris and I have talked about this pissed me off. When Joe Nuxall died, the Enquirer's been writing about Joe Nuxall forever. Joe Nuxall is an icon in this town. Screwed by the Hall of Fame today. An icon. All you had to do, if you were the Enquirer, was go through your archives of everything you've ever written. Within 3 days, you could have had a book that you publish on demand. You say, well, on demand is crap. Go to Barnes & Nobles. Go to Borders. You're buying on-demand books. They're not templates anymore. They're designed. If you put that up on your site a week after Joe Nuxall died and ran it through spring training, you make if you sell it for $24 through Amazon, you make $16.40 every sale you make. How many of those books do you think you'd have sold in Cincinnati? You do tall stacks. You do, I don't even know, I've been going for 13 years. Those are the 2 things I remember. And then you're a TV station. You got video everywhere. You can pull these things up. The thing that I did most on the Enquirer, and honestly, I blocked all their video, but that day I unblocked it, and I watched everybody crying talking about Joe Nuxall, right? Like, I grew up listening. Joe's like my uncle. He's like everybody's uncle. Or great uncle, or whatever, 19, great uncle. But you can open up your publishing and say, let's sell what we do. Let's not be fancy. You make it for all screens and all dimensions. It's not hard to do. It's not hard if you have a programming team. Optimizing your content for a big screen, for a little screen, for a TV screen, for a newspaper isn't hard. It's what designers do. It's what programmers do. And then you look to repurpose not only in books, but what we did at Technology Review is we made lots of mini newsletters and we sold them, and we had special sections, and we would go out and talk to advertisers and say, what do you want? Oh, you're Spain and you're doing a wind, you got this wind power energy. Great. So we pulled out all the stuff that we'd ever written about wind power and built them a big site. It was old content. We weren't selling new stuff, we sold them old stuff. $1.2 million. Now clearly we're not all going to Spain, but for us it was a nice little get.
What about the rights of the authors of those pieces and the photographers who may or may not have been employees at the time that they wrote that?
Photographers are the big pain in the ass because they all scratch their stuff out, which is why, in my world, I just never dealt with it. I said, you want to scratch that out? We're just going to do print. And if you'd like to come to the table, that's fine. And if you can't go back through your archive because you haven't set your database up to know who worked for you and who was a freelancer, that's why you need technologists to say, hey, when you're setting this up, if you ever want to be, if you know this is the business model, because when any place I've ever worked, when I worked there, when I worked for Condé Nast, whenever, when I wrote it, it was theirs. It wasn't, I didn't get a second pay if they did something else.
How long ago you wrote it, whether it was actually more online or not.
The contracts I signed had that Chuck D in perpetuity in any universe known and unknown clause.
But then the
Right.
writers get cut. Aren't you kind of just screwing over the journal?
That's up for the writers union to figure out. My job isn't to, I've been told by people in this town that they're very smart and can figure out business models. So you should figure out the contracts, but whether you do it or somebody else is doing it, I promise you there's Joe Nuxall books that are out there. And somebody's making money off of it. And if you spent your whole career covering the Reds and have all of that stuff, and he dies, the fact that you haven't figured it out doesn't mean you can't figure it out. So yeah, I can solve those problems, but tonight we're just sort of talking about what you could do. And if you're not, what other people are doing. Okay, so now we're going to talk about my favorite part. And this is the part that always gets my little nerds coming up to me afterwards, like, yes! And everybody then like goes blank or blanker. So there's 4 things that we need to know. Is that the internet from its very beginning, and this is when we're going to go back to Lick Life, is that the frustration with language that we have is that for someone like me or someone like the computer scientists or the media informatics folks, is that this stuff is it's not a question for us. And then you go out into a different world and it's never been thought of in ways that you guys do things that we don't think of. So the internet is nothing but a series of software agents. Social media only works when it's unfiltered. It has to be unfiltered. That doesn't mean that there aren't controls and rules, right? It's the invisible hand of God. And you don't compete with your users. These are things that you don't do, because you will lose. I refer to my original map. You have a network of networks of people who, when they get really interested, will spend all of their time breaking what you make. And if you don't think so, build a website, put on it, this is an unbreakable website. And within a half an hour, you will be pwned. All right, so essentially what this comes down to is what we're used to in old media is one-to-many, regulated control, versus many-to-many, unregulated control. And people hear unregulated and kind of freak out. So we're going to go back to the guy who wrote the seminal paper that becomes the internet, right? J.C.R. Licklider. Lick is the guy who put all this stuff together. Literally, when we built our site at Technology Review, we took the things that he said, and I said, these are the guiding components for what we do. Everything like things have to work in less than a second. Now try to do that when you're doing flash and video and audio. And I said, I don't care how. Same way that I said, not my job. Technology, you want to do this, we're going to do it right. So we know computers act as agents. What they do when they work best is go out and do work for you. Who uses RSS feeds? Software agent. It goes out and it brings RSS. Does anybody not know what RSS feed? Real simple syndication. You can go and, nope, everybody knows what it is? Excellent. All right, it is, you can go to a website and you can actually put a feed in so that it comes directly to your page. So you could pick your 10 favorite websites and make them all just display headlines on one page. So I don't ever have to go to a website to see their content. I can have it come to mine. Another reason the banner's dead is when you go to the Google homepage, like on the Google Reader that I use, I don't even click on it. I just click on a little open button and I can just read the text and see the picture. It just pulls it. I don't care what's on your site. I only want to read what I want to read. Megalomaniacal and egomaniacal. Computers at their best pull data for humans, right? That's what they do. They're acting as agents. They compute large streams of data so that you can then extrapolate meaning from them. That's all that it does. Is you need to set these things up so that they act as agents and that people can then extrapolate meaning without having to sift through lots of data. And that was all that said. Not all, but that's the basics of what Man-computer symbiosis set. Man-computer symbiosis. Look it up, read it, it's like 7 pages. The next thing we need to know about social media is that Metcalfe's law and Reed's law are really, really important. Right? There's Moore's law, which is, don't worry about it, it's about developing chips. Metcalfe's law says that the value is squared by the number of users, meaning if I have 2 users on a network, I have 2 nodes. As soon as I get 3, it's not 3, it's 3 squared, right? It's 9, because you can imagine the connections, you can make 9 connections. When I have 4, it's 16, right? I'm gonna stop at 4, because now I do English, right? Reed's law says that the network scales exponentially by the number of networks it connects to. Simply means the more people you have and the more networks you can connect to, the more powerful it is. And you end with that first map. And it's read right. The most valuable social media allows those 2 things to happen. And here's how they do it. Web 2.0 is bumped, by the way. 2.0 is an upgrade. We haven't upgraded the web, but we're just going to go with it because that's what people use. We know it's read right. We know that it's a platform. Platform means things like Ajax, right? Where you can use the web to stream information, to use it as a way to communicate with people. We know data is the driving force. You're not going to see story. You're not going to see video. You're not going to see anything other than data. We'll explain data with context becomes information, right? Like you can have those components, but at its base, it's data. The network effect, Reed's law, Metcalfe's law, are a necessity. MySpace sucks if it's me. It's a little bit better if there's 60 million of my favorite users. And even some of my not so favorite users. This gets people. It's not a centralized development platform. You can't sit in your offices and come up with the next great thing, because the next great thing eventually needs to be decentralized. It does. If it's going to be social media, that's why Facebook opened up their API. That's why MySpace is opening up their API. That's why Twitter is opening up that's why they're letting people develop on top of it. You need to allow syndication, even if that means banners don't come with it. And you need to have software that's networked together. That's the basics of what Web 2.0 is. I have all the citations for where this is. This isn't just me pulling this out, but I didn't think I needed to say it like according to Larry Lessing. So how do we build this thing? This is the big thing. Like, how do we make social media? We're in the media, right? And we have, by and large, I'm going to tone down my rant a little bit. It's not really. It's shameful that there's a social media phenomenon going on and the media is not a part of it.
The media doesn't understand it.
Shameful. Because when politicians don't understand things, we kick their ass on the front page. When Rain Krinsky won't go pull the trigger because he maybe doesn't get this out, we kill him. The fact that we don't understand it, and it's media, is shameful. Because we can understand it. Which gets back to the second point, which is technologists need a seat at the table. Because together we can figure it out. And if you think that it's not getting figured out, with Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, every game company that's out there that has gigantic communities of people that do nothing but create stuff around their games, and the 100 people that New Line Cinema flew over to see Lord of the Rings because they had had the most people coming to their fan sites to see trailers before it came out. There are 4 things that we have. There's 4 rules, or 4 must-haves, 4 rules, and then 3 summaries. So there's 11 things that we know we need to do to make this work. The first, and this is where things start to get better, is you need good content, right? Nobody's going to come to the shut-ins blog about their cat, right? Like that's never going to compete with anything. But as a business, if we do good content, which is why I say don't cross-train your journalists. Train them to be the best journalists they can be. Wish I was outside for just a minute. Because they're going to tell stories. Yes, Mary.
I'm confused, Brad, because I think you just said data was the driving force.
Mm-hmm. We're going to get to what data, content, and story means.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Because that says content. Data is content.
So no story.
We're going to get to what that means. And just in social media, because on MySpace, there's not a story, right? There's people making content, But that doesn't mean that you can't replicate that at a new site. And are you familiar with OpenCola? OpenCola is an old technology. And what it allowed you to do was create your own media, and then you would have your friends sign up for lists, and you could share your media back and forth. So you can integrate that. We're building a content management system for a news site right now with my independent studies kids that will allow you to create that at a news site. So every time I bookmark something, everybody in my buddy list will be able to see that and comment on it and use things like stickies to then leave notes and talk back and forth. So we'll get to what that means. So the first thing you need is good content. The second thing you need is keep the common simple. And I use a capital C because I love Larry Lessig, and I'm not going to do free Mickey, but the commons in our case is whatever site we have. If you got a taxonomy that's got like 97 things in it, you got too many. Because nobody puts as much time into your site as you do. Nobody cares. It's the horrible reality. They want to find what they want to find. Now, you can put that taxonomy in the background, and you absolutely should. But putting it in the front, when I got a technology review, we had a monthly magazine before I built a daily site there. We had like 86 freaking, we had like 50 stories. We had like 76 or 86 content areas. And somehow, magically, we turned that into 4. Right? So clearly, we had the 28 days between publishing. We had too much to think about that wasn't workers. Like, well, this isn't hydroelectric power. It's hydroelectric and thermal power. Right? Well, no, just, energy's fine. People are going to get that. They understand it. Because the first thing you do in a usability test, right, is a nomenclature. You say, okay, I know what we call it. What do you call it? And you get enough people to tell you what they call it, and you go, oh, well, maybe we should design this for what they want. So we keep the common simple. We keep the interface simple. Meaning you can make it, you can have 4 silos, but if you splash stuff everywhere and there's not a logical order to it, people won't find it. And then you have to decentralize the control and access to that. So if you can do that, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means, you have the beginnings, and you can think about Facebook and Twitter and MySpace and eBay and Amazon.com. And the places that grow have simple interfaces. Now, search makes the interface a little less important, particularly when you're buying a product. But you have bad search, and you have the same issue. So the next thing you have to say is, okay, to build social media, we can't have free riders, which means we can't just have people come in and take things and never contribute. Otherwise, you don't have social, right? You just have a junkyard of things. You need to have rules, compliance, and sanctions. Now, let me be clear. That does not mean you set up the rules and you set up the compliance. You have to, at some point, right, have a takedown policy. And you want to make that as DMCA compatible as possible. And you stick to the letter of the law. And then it's very easy to set up rules that allow self-moderating communities to happen. And I've had this argument with people. So, well, that only happens with Slashdot and FARC and technology places. And I said, yes, because you don't do it. If you did it, it would happen at your place too. We know this because there's software that runs it, that sets these rules up. You encourage commitment and reward participants. New Line Cinema does this better than any company I've ever seen outside of the game world. The way they give away their assets, allow people to do whatever they want with them, allow fans to create these big communities around what they do, and then they reward the fans by literally flying them out, allowing them to see director's cuts, being people that give them feedback. They flew 100 people out to New Zealand for like the last 3 weeks of the shooting of Lord of the Rings. Tell me, I would have been building fan sites and telling everybody, like, come see this movie so I can go to New Zealand. And the last thing is you need to allow for organic growth and change, which gets to that decentralization. You need to allow the community to turn into something that you didn't want it to turn into. Last thing, you need to allow it to self-organize, you need members to be added freely, and you need to allow the communication to be interactive and free. Other than your takedown policy, the minute you step in and remove something you don't like is the beginning of the end of whatever social community you have. That doesn't mean you can't rebuild it. It just means you've broken a trust in a read-write web where what I say is as important as what you say. And if I tell you to F off, you gotta just take it. Because here's the thing, when everybody gets to play, everybody gets to play. And that means sometimes you gotta deal with bad stuff. But if you set up rules compliance in a self-moderating community, in the same way that nobody stands up in this middle of this, and don't do this now because I've said it, and throws something at me or cusses me out because it's not acceptable. Why do we think that you can't set that up online in the same way that it happens in reality? Or, as we call it, flesh space. Because you can. How do we know? Because it happens. Does that mean, for those of you who teach or out in the business world, or have ever been in a budget meeting, sometimes somebody doesn't stand up and tell you to F off? No, sometimes it happens. And then there's sort of a social norm that happens. You go, my bad. Or you're labeled a jackass, right? And it's one of the two things. And the first time there's layoffs, you go. I can't say that that's ever happened to me, but I'm familiar with it. So these are some sites that do these things, right? Delicious, which I spelled wrong as DEL, Google Maps, Dodgeball, Stickies. These are things that follow those rules. Now, sometimes the interfaces aren't great, but they all have sort of commonalities. There's been lots of stuff written about it. Small pieces loosely joined, everything Larry Lessig has ever written, Howard Rheingold. These are sort of modified versions of what they talk about. All right, now it's 8, so I'm going to blow through this last part. Most of you probably at this point saying, well, this doesn't apply to what we do. So, first thing is cross-training doesn't work. You can do it. I'm not saying I couldn't teach a Flash. Well, I couldn't. But Anthony, Professor Dieter, could teach a Flash. And I promise you, the kids that we have that have come out of the CIT department that are doing Flash will do it better than you. And they don't want to be reporters. They want to do really cool Flash like the Twitter stuff. You saw we had kids that came out of our first semester who did some kick-ass stuff. Group structures, and we know this from small group communication, right? Like, I'm in the comm department, I'm not really a comm scholar, but I hear, and I've always set my teams up, that you take small groups and you find the skills that people have and you put them in positions to succeed. You don't say, I'm going to take you and take you out of the job that you do really well and put you in a job that you don't do well, but don't do this, and I'm going to move you over and have at it. You do that, Google's going to kick your ass every day. Every day. Because they're not pulling their folks off saying do something else. Because the skills are too complex to train your way out of the problem. Here are some of the skills, and this was as I wrote job descriptions when I was hiring programmers, these are things that I asked for. Human-computer interface. It ain't enough to know Flash. If you don't know HCI, if you don't know how people interact, if you don't know how to do usability testing, if you don't know why nomenclature is important and what you have to say isn't important as what your readers and users have to say, you can design the coolest thing in the world, and you and your mom will think it's great. How many times have you spent a lot of time building something, I just know for building this really cool thing and saying, oh my God, nobody came, right? Like, and we did it. I've done it a million times. We're going to do this. It's awesome. I'm awesome. And there were like 9 people showed up, and this was a week of my life. So these are not things you can just learn, right? .NET, Linux, if you want to do Unix programming, Visual Basic, JavaScript. I mean, I got kids in my men, they got to take basic JavaScript, and they come and like shudder in my office, because they can design anything. I could show you 3D stuff that would blow your mind that they did in a half an hour. In JavaScript, which is like 8 lines of code, they're like, no idea. I can't do it. No idea. I have no clue. 8 lines of code. Can't even say, hello world, my first program, which is the first chapter of like every JavaScript book. So to assume that you're going to learn that, and by the way, Flash is about to get a serious kick in the ass from Silverlight. So even if you're the best Flash developer in the world, and we've just spent all this money training all our journalists on Flash, by the way, Silverlight's great. Why? Because it's got a programming framework built into it, so you can work on and offline, and it works better than laying it on top of a database. And if that didn't make sense to you, that's why you can't cross-train people. Because you're going to spend all this time on this, and then 2 years later I'm going to say, well, now you got to go learn this. And by the way, .NET 2 is either out or about to come out. So why do you think you're going to keep up with that? The people that do it can't even keep up with it. I do it and I don't know. I have to have programmers come say, Brad, dude, we're moving on to Silverlight. And I don't know what that is. And they, he's 20. He's like, here it is. Like, oh, okay. So, Mary, to your question. Data is, and when we template it on to what we do at news organization, data is, at the end of the day, the thing that drives all social media. What we do at newspapers and television stations is add context to that data and then create information, story structure around that. So for us, that's good content, right? It all starts with data. You don't tell your students in News 1, I want you to find facts and figures and get numbers and make sure you have their names and where are they from and what's their address. That's all data. And then we give context to that data. $7 million doesn't mean anything unless that's what you're being sued for. Then it means something. What we've left out is what happens next. And that's the social media part that I'm talking about. Is that you can then say, okay, if we've got that data and we've put it in our content management system and we've done it right, so we know who the freelancers are and we know who we own, whose stuff we own, we know what the zip code is, we know what their address is, we know what their phone number is, we know all this information about what block it's on. We can turn our API open and say, here's how we tabulate all the data for all our stories. How would you display it? How do you want it? Does that answer your question, Mary? So it doesn't mean, and this is why I keep telling journalists, I'm in a journalist, I write every day, I have a journalism job outside of here. I'm a writer. If intellectual property ever went away, I would be totally, totally screwed. I love writing, it's the only thing I can really do. But it's not the end, it is a component of it. And it is, for us, 2 layers above the data that drives the internet. But for us, that's the good content that brings people to our sites. Now we have to invite them in to take that information and do new things with it. Things that maybe we wouldn't have done. All right, so just quickly, because this is the part, literally I gave this talk, this is the part when at the Magazine Publishers Association in Chicago, I gave this and it was just like a collective middle finger, like, this doesn't apply, that's fine. So everywhere that I've gone, I have gone through and said, here's what we're going to do. We have to get away from, we got a web team, we got a print team, we got a print production team, we got an online production team, we got online sales, we got data. No. You got 3 kinds of people, maybe 4. You got people that collect data and then give it context and information. You got people who display it, whether it's on print, whether it's on a website, whether it's on a mobile machine. You got people who sell data, the people that market it and the people that sell it. If you break your folks up into online and print, you've done 2 things. You've created Apple in 1984, and go see what happened to Steve Jobs 3 years after that. And you've created 2 editorial, sales, and marketing missions. Because I promise you, the print people don't ever invite the web people to their budget meetings and say, what do you think we should do? They say, here's what we did, what can you do with this? And we have an answer, right? Let it simmer. So you say, okay, what's another way to organize? Well, what we did at Technology Review is, first off, and nobody likes to hear this, and apologies, I submitted a plan that got accepted, and we fired 1/3 of the staff. Went around and said, we're going to integrate. And they said, we don't really want to work on the web. Handed them a check. Great. Move along. And we created 1 editorial desk. And you wrote for the medium that made the most sense. And you would do shorts, and we would do longs, and we would do features, and we would do news, and it didn't make a difference. You wrote it. Because if you're a reporter and a writer, that's what you do. We had 1 copy desk. Why? Because copy desks are different online and in print. If you use that long dash, what's that called, an M dash? If you use that online, about half the time you're going to get the little like @ sign and things like that. If you use the cute smart quotes, yeah, breaks everything. right? You use red. If you're a designer online, I will punch you in the face. Red is awful. So if you break people up, you're going to have two different missions. They gave me, and MIT's red, they gave me this gigantic red logo and said, red is your primary color. I said, great. So we went and did a mock-up, and I had everything in like white text like this. I hate white text, but whatever. You know, and everything bled, and I'm like, let's look at it on this monitor. And they said, that's awful. And I said, you maybe shouldn't have printed up all our letterhead, all our business cards, the magazine, before maybe you talk to us. Because we had two design staffs. So you go through and say, okay, editors and writers and copy desk people are going to go do journalism. This also upsets people. Events and calendars are not unique, right? They're calendars by the nature. They're meant to be seen. So why do you have journalists going out and spending their time getting things that aren't unique? That journalists do unique things. That's what we do. But what we do with calendars as events is we market them and we sell them. So moving them into the marketing department, even though my former student likes doing calendars, to me, doesn't make sense. Because you want your journalists doing journalism and your marketers and your salespeople doing marketing and sales. That's revolutionary, isn't it? You have your print design and your online design and your marketing design. So how many times does the marketing department come to you and say, here's what we did? And you look at it and go, it doesn't match what you've done here with our logo. And then we put it online, and you're like, it doesn't work here. You need to have your designers together, not so that one dictates another, although there's going to be a boss, but so that you can say, okay, here's one mission for what we look like. Integrated sales team. We fired our sales team because they said we don't know how to sell online. I said, beat it. We grew from 200,000 to 800,000 when the time I got there, 18 months. We matched the print revenues in 18 months. We were in the black in 18 months. I hired 13 people without raising my budget because we built the technology that we use. We integrated our teams. We taught the salespeople, here's how you sell online. And by the way, don't go out and sell what you do and say, by the way, to buy this print ad, I'll give you $1 million. Because my answer was, you really won't. And you need to call them back. You know how in a newspaper or a television ad, you have a, here's how much this costs? The reason they know how much an ad at the Super Bowl costs is because they put a price on it. Right? There's a price on what I do. You don't just get to slap stuff up there and say, banner ads everywhere, roadblocks, everybody, drop downs, peelbacks. There is a price. It ain't no different than the print and the TV and the radio. There's a price to everything. So the last thing I'm going to say is all your newsrooms are messed up. Right? Is that in a web world, in a digital world, the web publishes per second. Write something, get breaking news, get something that happens where it's the first thing it goes. Get that up on the web. Maybe if you're TV, you're trying to get it up, but you're putting something up, ready, get it up on the website. So why is it that we've designed our newsrooms around either the daily or the monthly or the every 3 hours, and then we retrofit back on what's happening immediately? Doesn't make sense. Now go into a newsroom and say, hey, print managing editor, by the way, you don't touch everything that we do, so why the hell are you making more money than I am? Everything that we do goes up on the web. Here's 400 things that you don't even see. Why are you my boss? See how that works?
2 questions.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about merging the I guess, content producers, you know, the editorial staffs.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do about an organization that has the opinion that there are different kinds of journalism? That, like you said, you got to get that breaking news up, but you need to separate that away from the more enterprise newsy pieces. And my second question is...
Well, let me answer that question first. If you're a reporter, you should have beats, you should have general assignments, you should have desks. You need to think about, is that different? If you got somebody that can only write features but can't write breaking news in a modern world, either you make room and say you're going to go off on your own and you're going to do long-form investigative pieces.
But what I'm saying is there's only so many hours in a day, and if you're spending most of your time doing online updates.
When did I say you were doing most of your online updates?
What's that?
I never said...
I know you didn't say that. I'm not saying that. But
Here's the thing, when 9/11 happened, you're gonna spend most of your time doing online updates. During the days when nothing's happening, you do what you do, you manage your time.
But then those, because of the hits that were received during when news breaks, there becomes almost an addiction, and they want those updates no matter if they're newsworthy or not.
Well, then you do it for like 6 months and you realize like, that's silly.
Well,
Like just clicking and hitting, like when our book came out, right? Like we were like, we're not gonna look at Amazon ranking, we're not, in the whole day that it was out, we just hit refresh. We were like, we're number 7, we're number 46, like what the hell's going on? Like that happened. But if you understand how online ads are sold, right? The way Dart works or the way most publishing systems work is that you have a net effect, right? So if you've sold something over the course of a month, there's only so many ads that will get served throughout a day. So big traffic spikes at the end of the day don't help you monetarily because it stops at a certain level. So if you get addicted to that, you've just fundamentally said, well, I don't understand actually how the technology works. You don't want big spikes. You want steady spikes that go over the course of, but you're still going to do breaking news.
I'm saying that, I've been in that environment. I know people who are in that environment.
Right.
And I see that it's misguided, but I wanted to see what you thought in terms of, there's mouth service being paid to merging them, but.
Right, it absolutely is not happening.
Right.
I absolutely agree with you
I wanted
there.
to see.
No, it absolutely isn't. I had to fire a third, right. I was the least popular guy.
I don't mean do I espouse that, somebody should be just a long form feature writer
right.
and not be able to have the other tools in the tool bag.
Well, but the point is, if you understand how the ad system works, and if you're a publisher or you're somebody that's in the management team, and you don't, here'll be my rude. Like, I have a thing in my classroom where I tell my kids, like, I have rules of stupid. Like, if I just get done saying something and you raise your hand and look at me and go, I wasn't listening, what was that? I say, you violated the law of stupid. If you run a business and say, I don't actually understand how we make money and how the ad system works, that's bad. What you should say is, hey, somebody explain this to me. Let's figure out how this works so that we can then better go back through and say, here's how this should operate. Because again, we don't have to be right all the time. We can be mostly right and other people can be right too. And clearly, if this was what was happening, I would not be giving the presentation.
The follow-up question to this is, and like I said, I've been in this environment. I know a lot of people that are still in this environment. And here's where maybe the old-fashioned journalist in me gets up on my soapbox. But how do you feel, or where do you see it going, that only page views and hits drives story play and story emphasis decision making?
I feel the same way I feel about circulation and costs and paper costs driving so many pages.
But wouldn't you also acknowledge that sometimes it's an important story may not be the one that people immediately flock to?
Sure. Just like sometimes you say, well, this is going to cost us a little more money to put this extra page in, or 2 pages, 4 pages in the paper today, but this is important because Nux all died and we're going to do it. It's no different. It's absolutely no different. And if you have one newsroom that understands what journalism is, they'll say, you know what, we're going to spend time on this because it's important. And it may not get all the play that we wanted to, but we're going to do the story. Journalism is journalism. The web doesn't change journalism at all.
I guess what I'm saying is that you and I are probably in agreement, but what I'm saying that I think the trend is going is that people view it as different. And that
again, I think people that are running media organizations today in traditional environments feel that way.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with that. Well, how do they feel? That page views and hits, it's very easy to fall into the trap where getting big spikes is more important than doing proper good journalism online, because you see gigantic groups of people coming in and you begin to say, well, we need to do more of these types of stories instead of saying, here's the stories we should be doing.
Right.
Can I ask you
mean,
just-
it counts.
Yeah, hang on.
Sorry, go ahead.
For the people who came here, part of the way that we advertised this program tonight was to let people know what skills they need, where the jobs are going, what's coming up down the pike. Can you, off the lecture for a little while, tell us what you think all of us who are working journalists in this room need
Where
to
the
know?
jobs are?
Where they're going.
Well, I mean, go to Media Bistro and do a search. Like when you look for reporters, and they're asking for these kinds of skill sets. They're asking for people that can look at data. They're asking for people. What I'm advocating and what I think you're going to see from media companies is the move away from saying, I want somebody that can do everything. And we need to begin to look at teams. Now, what that means is there's going to be, I think, there's going to be fewer jobs for traditional journalists because we need to hire technologists who can now, just like you need designers to put out your magazine or your newspaper or whatever, you need people that can display this on screens, right? So if you can learn this as well, just like they're a graphic journalist, right? My friend was a graphic journalist at the New York Times business section. All she did was graphic journalism for the business page on Monday. But she knew how to do graphics, she knew how to do journalism, I mean, she knew, but she didn't design the paper. But she was very good at infographics. So if you can find a skill set that you're good at, look, if you know usability and you can't get a job, we doubled our traffic just by cleaning up our interface and doing a new design before we did anything. So if you're a working journalist, I mean, it's nice to learn Flash, it's nice to learn that stuff, but I think it's difficult to say you're going to have a job in 10 years. I know in newsrooms today what's happening is they're moving people around. Copy editors end up on the Flash desk, like people are all over the place. So learning, in a year here, take our basic and advanced Flash class. I took freshmen and sophomores who had gone through Flash 1 here down at the Enquirer, and they had a very positive reaction. And we can teach you how to do the basics of that. Are you going to learn aesthetics? Are you going to learn Silverlight? Are you going to learn the underlying programming that goes with that? Then you may make a career choice and say, well, what I want to do is that. And I want to now, my second career in journalism will be, because we move around, right? Like you start off as a general assignment, you write obituaries, and then you move somewhere else. But a quick scan of Media Bistro, and you'll find. The other thing is, which Mary and I have talked about, is learn how to copy it. I mean, I think the biggest thing that you could ever learn how to do is copy it, because the writing and the way newsrooms are getting scaled back, they always hit the copy desk first, as if, like, it's okay to not be able to write. I mean, do you disagree with that? No? Okay.
How important do you think it is today for, these online people, for lack of a better term, to have, at least some grounding in journalistic, editorial standards, ethics, just kind of the basics of news writing, and vice versa? Reporters have basic grounding in some of these new technologies.
Again, see, I think if you get a good group dynamic, you learn that. But the designer shouldn't be dictating to you. No designer has ever come to me and said, hey, I went ahead and changed your text because it didn't seem to work right for me.
I've had that happen.
Did you yell at them?
Yeah.
Right. Your immediate reaction is stay the hell, oh, I couldn't copy. So, I think it's always good to be able to speak the language. But again, this stuff moves so quickly. Flash to Silverlight to whatever comes next, Maya, Rhino, whatever's out there after that, or actually Rhino to Maya, whatever comes out next. You're going to spend your whole life sort of dealing with that. Now you can learn basic interface. So once you learn how a software program works, I can sit down with an audio program. I know GarageBand now, I know Soundtrack, I can teach myself Pro Tools. But that's all I do. I mean, I'll come in and spend a semester teaching and with that program all the time. Now, if you're a reporter and you're working 40 hours, 60, whatever, do you want to do that? And you're off time, do you want to go learn more stuff? So I think it's more about putting teams together and getting the best out of what they do and having a common language that you can all talk about.
Okay, I'm hearing a mixed message. If I were looking for a job in newspapers today, I'm a traditional journalist, and I'm looking to survive, what I'm hearing you say is, don't try to do everything. But what I'm also hearing you say is, you better learn how to do everything.
No,
So
what I'm saying
am I
is,
supposed to
you're
do?
not ever going to be as good as the people that we train to do this specifically. So if they want somebody that has the mix, you'll get that job. But if they want somebody that's really good at it and does it, they're going to hire somebody that does it. What I'm saying is you can try to cross-train people, but it doesn't work. We know it doesn't work.
Okay, but if I were still a working journalist, what should I be doing to survive and stay in journalism?
Some of this comes down to the way businesses are structured. I think that journalists that are good should focus on doing really good journalism, because the number one tenet of getting any content or getting any people to read is to have really good content. So be really good, be really flexible, understand that sometimes you have to write for the web, which is no different than writing for the newspaper, by the way. It's the same thing. And do it better than the people around you. I mean, if I had a magic bullet, there wouldn't be a concern amongst journalists. What's happening, and we know what's happening, is that more of these jobs are out there. And you have to ask yourself, can you compete with someone that's been doing this any more than could my Flash designer come and take a semester of News 1 and do the same kind of journalism that you do?
Well, they can't, that's the point. Maybe they'll know all this stuff that you have up there, which I do not.
Right.
They are not going to out-report me ever.
Right. In the same way that you are never going to out-Flash 3D
That's exactly
interface.
right. But there needs to be room for both jobs. I'm still trying
Sure,
to
no,
figure out
absolutely there is.
how's my station going to make money on this? How are we gonna use this and make some money?
That's easy. Lots of folks are making money. One, if you package up all your tall stack stuff, sell it as a DVD, partner with a newspaper and put out books and you sell, like who makes money? People that sell products and people that do keyword searching, right? You focus on data, directories, that's where people go. That's why Google and Microsoft and Yahoo are winning that battle, because they're doing directory searches that pull up keywords, because banners are going away. So you say, what product can I sell? Well, what do? You do breaking news, which clearly is going to get people coming. Is your sales team equipped? Do they understand? Are there pricing models for all of your online stuff? Do they have like an interactive ad part of the site where you can go in and say, oh, this was this much and this is this much and here's how bumpers work and this costs this much? I mean, you set it up just like you set up any other business, is that you have to put a price on it, and you don't give it away. As soon as you give it away, you've given it away. One more, and then we got to go. People are leaving.
Well, you were saying earlier how a lot of browsers are going to ad blocking. So say that you have, a great simple interface for everyone to use, and it's, your site's totally socially networked, but everyone that goes there is blocking all of your ads. What do you turn to at that point?
Keywords.
Reviews and product.
You don't block keywords, because if you block text,
Okay.
you
Yeah, you block
right.
text.
Right. So you do that, and then you don't look for click-throughs. You look for, I can't remember what they're called, generating customer, lead generation, where the keywords then lead people. Advertisers will pay more for when you click on something and give you data than if you just see it. Because what ComScore and eMarketer found was that even just displaying banner ads doesn't brand you, because it's these heavy clickers who are going to auction sites and buying cars. Okay, we went way over. Thank you guys for staying.